So we shift gears and we speak a bit about the World Refugee Day, a pretty much important conversation for us to get into. And I'll not do a lot of introduction because we have people who understand the subject pretty much on set, and they'll be guiding us through this. And so as we get to commemorate this day, it's very important that we have conversations revolving around us. We keep saying that nobody is vulnerable to those things that would trigger one to be a refugee. And therefore, we need to be careful, and especially at this very moment when we are headed to an electioneering period, when you see pockets of and tenets of intolerance, then it needs for us to call ourselves back to order. And so joining us for this very conversation is Grace Kirui, Danish Refugee of Danish Refugee Council. She'll be introducing herself further and tell us what she does there, as well as the gentleman in the middle, Okelo Abulon, from a community leader that is from Ethiopia, and a community leader for refugees or of refugees, depending on how you want to say it. And lastly, we also have Paul Kiminza, who's a legal scholar on refugee issues. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for creating time to speak to us. And I think I'll go straight to the point. And first of all, start by probably having a basic, say definition of who a refugee is, because most of the people do not seem to understand this. And we actually play around, especially when it comes to the questions of violence and all that, not knowing that this could let us go to levels where we are refugees. And so we'll start with you, Grace.
Okay, thank you. So a refugee basically is an individual or a group of people who have fleeing a situation of conflict, of violence, of persecution. So they are leaving their country of origin, they are crossing into an international border in search of safety. So that's basically the definition, the basic definition.
Is that the same definition legally?
Well, legally speaking, a refugee is a person who, under the Refugee Act of Kenya, crosses an international boundary and then makes their way into our country. But when they cross the boundary, they're not known as refugees, they're known as asylum seekers. So the Act is very clear on the definition of refugee in terms of what are the things that you're fleeing from. So when you cross an international boundary and you make your way into Kenya, you're not a refugee, you're an asylum seeker. When you now make an application to become a refugee, it's called the Refugee Status Determination process. You go to the Refugee Affairs Secretariat, that was what it used to be called, now it's called the Department of Refugee Services, and you make an application based on fear of persecution for political reasons, for sex, for gender, for religion, ethnicity and race. If you are fleeing persecution for any of those reasons, then under the Act you qualify as a refugee. But then there's a determination process that goes into that, so that we actually look into the reasons why you're fleeing, and there'll be an officer who takes you through the process to understand for sure if what you are saying is true, and then you get the classification as a refugee.
And perhaps we'd want to understand some more on this, especially for those ones who've not really gotten the legal documents so far.
Yes.
And Okelo, you say that you sit in as a community leader for refugees. First of all, I'd love to understand whether you have attained this legal documentation that Paul speaks of, and whether there were some difficulties into getting this, or it was an easy process, guided through. You have met Dr. Masanga on your way out. He speaks hugely on this question because then he fled Uganda at some point in time with the difficulties to the United Kingdom, and up until today, with his family and all that, they've never gotten back home. He speaks volumes of how it is important to make sure that a nation is, at a level of peace, because then what does it benefit you to run into trouble for them to have your people, going out and they are out there homeless and all that? So how easy has it been for you to attain this, a title, and most importantly, in terms of the legal perspective of the nation that you sit in?
Thank you very much. Okay, as I've already said, that I'm a refugee from Ethiopia as a community leader, and it is true that as refugees we left our country involuntarily. We never wanted to leave the country, but due to a pressure at home, we managed to reach to Kenya, which is a safe home for us right now. So in terms of legal documentation, it is very important for each refugees living in Kenya to have some document, because those documents are the ones that that give them access to services and to other important things. But getting them sometimes is hard, but sometimes it's easier. Meaning, if you follow the process of getting those documentation, it will at least take some few days or times. but at the end of the day, you will be given those documents. We are talking of proof of registration, where the first time you arrived in Kenya is the first document that you will be issued, and it is the first document that UNHCR will start giving you services. In terms of UNHCR, once you are in Kenya and the government of Department of Refugee Services allow you to register, you will actually be given those documents. But sometimes a little bit takes time, depending on what you will, the historical background of yours, your testimony,
right.
A little bit, yeah, but it is easier sometimes. Yeah.
All right, Paul, we'll come back to you and get to understand why then it gets a little bit intense, knowing very well that this is a person who seeks asylum,
yes.
and probably sometimes their troubles can literally be seen, and we've seen mothers struggling with their kids to attain this. But before then, what then is the role of the actors, like for instance, Danish Refugee Council, say NGOs and the government in all this?
Okay, so like Danish Refugee Council, once we have the refugees and the asylum seekers, for example, now in Dadaab, in Kakuma and Kalobey, we offer them ongoing protection. So whereby we work with the case workers, we work with them, the refugees and asylum seekers, offering them services and helping them to address any day-to-day emerging issues related to gender-based violence, child protection, medical issues, or even education. And also we definitely have to collaborate with actors such as the UNHCR and even the government to coordinate better to make sure that they get the relevant services, and also to make sure that they peacefully coexist with existing communities. And also the issues about accommodation and shelter, making sure that they are accommodated in a safe and secure manner.
So at what point do you accommodate them? At a point where they've already received this legal documentation, or at a point where they now come, they're in search for safety, and then do you bring them in and help them attain the documentation?
Yeah, so even as they go through the process of getting the documentation, we come in, and Danish and many other agencies on ground, they offer them the necessary services even as they go through the processes of getting the documentation.
How crucial is this aspect of documentation for, say, a refugee? For instance, those ones who have and those ones who do not have. What are the difficulties that the ones who do not have go through?
Okay, once you do not have the documentation that we are talking about, it make it difficult for you to access the services.
Okay.
The services we are talking of attaining like durable solution, maybe repatriation if you want it, or we are talking of resettlement, we are talking of integration. So if you do not have this documentation, you cannot benefit the services from UNHCR or either from partners. And then even things to do with education, because for you to enroll into education sector, you have to have those documents that we are talking about.
Yeah.
But once you do not have them, it will be very, very actually hard for you to to benefit from those things. So, but what UNHCR does is to consider each refugees first to have those documents, because they themselves knows that if you do not have those documents, you cannot have those services.
Yeah.
And then
Well, Paul, there are instances where you, for instance, take a look at what is happening in Ukraine and probably what is happening in areas like DR Congo, what's happened, with this question of secession during the South Sudan, the split. And it is almost clear that there is a problem back there. But then we'll see these people coming, seeking asylum.
Yes.
Are there instances where there are individuals that can be locked out, that can be denied the legal documentation, and why? And what makes it difficult when, the situation appears as outright?
Okay, well, when the situation appears outright, there is what used to be called a Prima Facie refugee.
Yeah.
A Prima Facie refugee is one who looks on the outset to qualify as a refugee. Now, the difficulties that arise are predominantly to do with the fact that when these people are coming from their countries, oftentimes they're fleeing in the dead of night. They've been attacked, they're leaving with nothing. So they don't, you know, when you are in your home country and you're safe and everything is okay, you're not exactly planning to be kicked out in the middle of the night. So you don't have your documents, you don't have your papers. And Kenyans who were kicked out during the post-election violence 2008 can attest to this. When violence visited their doorstep, they didn't exactly have their ID and their passport or everything conveniently in their bag so that they could run to the border. They just ran. Some of them ran with just what they had on. So when they get to the border, the problem for the Kenyan officers is when they're attempting to determine who you are, of course the first thing they want to know is, okay, where is your ID? You don't have one. Okay, do you have a passport? I don't have one. It's back home, and maybe that home has been torched. Yeah. It is now ablaze, and it's on fire. So how do we know you are who you say you are? How do we know you're not, for instance, a terrorist or something else? And or maybe even a criminal that is fleeing your home country, attempting to claim to be a refugee so that you can escape prosecution for criminal activity that you've done back home. The problem is very much so one of determining who you say you are vis-a-vis us, because we have to know this person is who they say they are. Yeah. And the problem now becomes if you don't have documentation of any kind, or even, for instance, let's say you do have the documentation, how do we know it's real? Right? Because there are people who fake papers. Yeah. We need to know for sure that these people are who they say they are. And then because once you become a refugee, you're entitled to certain benefits, just as the previous panelists have spoken. Now, we don't want to be giving out those benefits to individuals who are not deserving, because we only want the persons who are genuinely here for reasons of persecution, that they're genuinely fleeing their home countries because something has happened to them. Right. Not people who are just here because they heard there's a free meal being given by UNHCR or the government of Kenya is providing some sort of thing, and they want to claim those benefits by claiming to be a refugee.
And I mean, I'd love to ask this to Grace, expounding further on what it is that Paul speaks of. What goes into the process of conducting the due diligence? Because even in the case of 2007, 2008 post-election violence, we saw what happened in the country. There are very many people who've benefited out of those processes that would have gone to internally displaced persons. And up until date, there are those ones that really have even refused to be repatriated. And so how do you get to know that this one really deserves to be treated as a refugee and to enjoy and to be accorded the benefits that come along with that?
Okay, so I believe in terms of determining the refugee status, I'm sure my colleague can speak more on that, but I know that we also have a law in place that stipulates what we define as a refugee. And also we try to, I think they will try to find next of kin, try to understand the history and so forth. So that is primarily what they will look at. Yeah, but I think
legally, yes, a due diligence process?
Oh yes, because it has to be a very extensive search. We're looking at your entire life's history. We're looking at corroborative information that we can gather together that paints a picture to us that what you're telling us is the truth. And I know he has gone through such a process where you give us a story of your life, and then we try to corroborate using evidence from pieces that we can get together, either official government sources from where you came from, or other pieces of information from other refugees that we have that we've already determined their stories to be true. We then corroborate that information to paint a holistic picture of your life. Then we can tell whether or not the majority of what you're telling us is true, because unfortunately in a conflict zone, information is hard to come by, particularly, for instance, when there is a war going on. It's very difficult now to go and start doing an investigation there to find out whether or not what you told us here is true, because the people who know that information are currently engaged in a war. So that is really a very difficult thing for the RSD, the RSD staff, the Refugee Status Determination staff, because they have to find out whether or not this person is telling us the truth while an ongoing conflict is happening. You see, like for instance, in the DRC example that you just gave us now, right now that conflict has been going on for a while. Yeah. And the sources of information that could corroborate your story are back in DRC. Right? So how do we go to DRC to confirm that? We can't. So the only way we can do it is now to find out whether or not what you're telling us makes sense.
Right.
Right? As vis-a-vis the other information that we have collected from other refugees or from even government sources, our own government sources in DRC, for instance, our embassy, that is giving us information back here regarding what is happening there. Right. So that's how we corroborate information.
Okay, look here to share what really conspired or, transpired, so to speak, for you to be in this state.
Basically, I I came to Kenya in 2004 due to the incidents that took place in Gambela, Ethiopia by then. But I never thought that I'm coming to Kenya because the situation forced me to come to Kenya. And then by the time I arrived to Lokichokio border, because that was my entrance border to Kenya, and then I settled in Kakuma. By then, life was a bit hard, but due to the Kenyan government, the goodness of the states, they actually welcome us with an open heart and open hand, where they include us in the systems after the registration. Education is there. The best thing for us as refugees, mostly what we are benefiting here is the kind of education systems that the Kenyan government is incorporating inclusivity, including refugees into it. That is the best thing. And what I'm inspired with Kenyan government is how the way they manage the peace, the peaceful environment. That is the best things that I mostly love. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, just to touch on that a little bit, the theme of this year's World Refugee Day is integration. So the reason why we're even here today is to talk about integration. Okay. And our partners have been dealing with this subject very well, because we have had activities over the past week with our partners such as Kituo cha Sheria, Refugee Consortium of Kenya, Mount Kenya University, Kenyatta University, and Nairobi University, as well as other partners like Highest Kenya and I think a few others. What we're attempting to do is to show that life outside the camps is possible. Yeah. Because, when they're stuck in camps, life is very diminished there. And I mean, that could have informed this question. Yes. Just how long then can one, stay as a refugee? Okay. Yeah. Now, under the old Refugee Act regime, it was almost an indefinite period. And it still is to some extent, because what we are looking at is not the length of time that you are a refugee. It is the length of time that the situation that forced you to come here in the first place, is it still existing? Because if, for instance, we say that you came here because there is a war, and that war is still ongoing, we cannot then say that you are no longer a refugee. The war has to stop. And not only stop, there must be sufficient security for the person to believe that, yes, if I go back home, I can survive there, I can be okay. So it's not really a definite period, because there are people who have been refugees for over 30 years. And I mean, there are instances where the situation is calm back at home, but still these people do not want to be repatriated. Yes. And perhaps we'll come back to that briefly. Grace, you equip them with skills, you make sure that you help, take care of them, give them a decent life, education and all that. How long can you keep them? How long can you say, now we let you to the world? Because it becomes difficult for someone who's, and I mean, I was talking to someone who was doing a research on that, conducting their thesis on that, and they say these people have stayed in camps, they have, built families in camps. Like literally everything is happening as it would outside the camps, and so it's their home. How do you tell them now we want to repatriate you? How do you tell them now you have to create space for somebody else?
I think first of all, the skills are necessary for them to be functional either here in the country or even when they return back home. So the issue is that, as my colleagues have said, we are moving towards integration. We are moving towards them functionally and working together within these societies that we have here. So I think it's a process issue. It's you just can't, like you're saying, this is it, this is enough skills we can give you for now. But you actually, it's an ongoing, depending on how the context is moving. At some point, for example, we used to give basic skills that we, the basic traditional skills. But now the world, for example, is moving towards digitized processes, digital economies. We also have to transition them to prepare them for that kind of world that is going to meet them whenever they're integrated in the country or even once they return home. So I think it's not like a time-bound thing, but it's actually a matter of trying to be flexible, adaptable to what is changing, and making sure that they can also keep up with the necessary skills that they have.
All right. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Paul, yes. Grace, and Okelo, allow us to take a short break. Absolutely. And then come back, expound further on that.
Despite being visually impaired, he is a jack of all trades. It is our quest to find answers on how to take care of children with special needs and those with disability. You do not need to see musical notes to understand music, but rather to have your soul feel the vibe.
Actually, for us to make a wheelchair, we have to take measurements of the user.
After doing my assessment, I get to know the parent, I get to know the heaviness she's carrying.
Disability comes at different stages of life.
How well do you know what's happening around you? Morning Cafe with heated political debates, Baraza la Siasa.
Hiyo kitu azungumzie, angalie hali ya maisha ya watu.
Informative health discussions, business, farming, Tasty Wednesday, Fitness Thursday, and Feel Good Friday with amazing DJs, celebs,
waimbaji, kuna comedians, alafu kuna wajinga,
and music bands every Monday to Friday from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. The next set of millionaires are farmers, as we know agriculture has been and still is the backbone of our economy. As we traverse the different counties to meet different farmers, we ensure to get the story of how they started farming and even how they continue to penetrate the market and overcome the challenges.
Hapa, the reason why nilieka goose na si ducks. Goose, they are very easy to maintain.
A lot of farmers keep on calling, inquiring whether you're supposed to raise some seeds in the nursery or you're supposed to do them directly in the field.
The greenhouse helps us control the temperature because the temperature needs to be between 28 to 32 degrees.
Walk this journey with us every Sunday at 6:30 p.m. It's no secret, construction ain't cheap. But how do we make it affordable? Different individuals are finding ways of cutting down cost by use of pre-stressed slabs other than reinforced concrete, recycling plastics to make pavers.
The brick is stronger, it's cheaper, and it's lighter.
And recycling wastewater in your household.
What happens to my waste from the washroom, the solid waste? All that can break down.
Those are just but a few. Every Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. we talk construction.
There's no alpha without an omega. There's no lead without any followers. No man is an island. We need each other. We need this conference.
We say it, we do it, we act it.
Kama una mpenzi wako, kila siku
the World Refugee Day. Important that we have these conversations that revolve around that. And in studio for the same is Paul Kiminza, who is a legal scholar of refugee issues. We also have Okelo Abulong. That's a tongue twister. I got it right, right?
Yeah, you got it right.
Yes, he's a community leader for refugees, and as well as Grace Kirui, who's also a member of Danish Refugee Council. And so we come to you, Okelo, and especially the question of repatriation. Yeah, most of the times you do not find these people having the desire to be taken back home? Because, I mean, you came there with your mommy, you're pretty young, and this is the life that you have known. And so all of a sudden you're being told that you can go back home, that it's all calm, it's all easy, you're not even certain about it. It becomes a struggle for people to be repatriated. And I mean, most of the times they'll want to stick around that. How many times have we spoken about the closure of Dadaab and all that? But up until today, it is not happening. What informs that? And while we're on break, we're just having a chit chat on someone I've hosted before, and we spoke of how they managed to go abroad. I am told that in these camps, most of the times, the only desire that is there is to fly out. These people do not want to imagine that they will go back home. They want to imagine that it is America, it is the United Kingdom, and all that.
Okay, thank you for that question. Okay, when it comes to issues of repatriation, repatriation is one of the durable solutions set aside for refugees, alongside other resettlement and integration. But mostly you don't find refugees willing to be repatriated back due to as my friend was saying, Paul, the condition back at home. You cannot decide to go when the problem is still existing. The problem that you escaped because is the one that let you leave the country is still existing. That is mainly the major issues that doesn't allow most of the refugees to have that to be willing to go back home because of those problems. Yeah, as we are like in Kenya right now, we basically concentrate on the two like resettlement and integration. But right now, most of us had stayed in Kenya for long. For instance, me, I came in 2004. How many years did I stay in Kenya? Almost close to 20. And then mine is a little bit smaller number. There are those who stay in Kenya for above 30 years in Kenya. So imagine going back home. Those people have actually lost home. They do not have home. They don't even have a single resources at home. Even their land that they used to have, it was taken away when they are in Kenya. So the only option that we refugees mainly pray for is either to be repatriated, either to be integrated or given resettlement. Okay. Right now, we thank Kenyan government. They are talking of integration, which make refugees now feel so easier. They feel happy because if it is implemented, most of us will actually integrate in Kenya and also become the same within Kenya community, as we are benefiting a lot of things in Kenya. For instance, education. For instance, like the way we brought up in Kenya, just like we are already Kenyan, but we do not only have that documentation and other things. Comes the way of resettlement. Resettlement has criteria. It doesn't mean that you are refugees, you have that chance of going for resettlement. It depends on the testimony that you have. Okay. It depends on the kind of problems that you are still facing in Kenya. That's now how resettlement issue will come in. But the more opportunity that we have right now is the subjects of integration, isn't it, Paul? Yeah. Where we are actually happy about it. Yeah.
Yes. That will be very much important. But how is that then possible without threatening the stability of this particular space where these refugees are being repatriated, are being integrated in, because there's always that general feel, oh, you have come to take our space. I mean, questions of xenophobia are triggered by such. So how is this then done in a very amicable and smooth way to make sure that yes, they are incorporated in this society and it does not bring some essence of tension?
That's a very good question, because one of the major issues with the integration of any community of peoples into a community that is not ostensibly their own is always the question of the xenophobia that they will face. I know many Kenyans will remember the period of time in South Africa, for instance, when there was a huge case of xenophobia, and they weren't even refugees. They had gone there for work and they were being kicked out. So the idea that refugees are coming here to take our jobs, they're going to take our land, why are they occupying that piece of land? But the truth is that these are people who need our help. They came to this country when they were traumatized. They left with nothing. And many of them through a lot of grit, because you must understand that the people who make it to the border are the hardiest of individuals. These are the people who had the grit to run all night and for several days in some instances in order to get here. Yeah. So these are not people who are quitters. These are people who are very strong in mind and body to be able to run across the border to get here. So if you ask me, these are how a country grows like ours, is to integrate the sharpest people that we have. And these people, by the fact that they managed to survive for so long in such difficult conditions, tells me that if we give them the opportunity, they will do very well here. And in fact, many of them, despite the fact that they've been in the camps all this time, they have managed to educate themselves, they've taken themselves to school, they've gone to university, some of them even have university degrees, despite the fact that they had significant difficulties and challenges in getting those degrees. And yet, many Kenyans who have a far better, far easier go of it have not managed to get the same level of qualification. So it tells me that these people, if we give them that chance, they will definitely use it to better the country. Because you must understand, like what my friend Okello was talking about just now, when he's saying that the government is saying for them to go home, for instance. When you say that to most refugees who have been here for 30 years, they ask you home where?
Where?
Right? I was born in Kenya. I don't know any other place. I don't know anyone in Somalia. I don't know anyone in Ethiopia. I don't know anyone outside of Kenya. The only place that I've ever known is Kenya. So when the government then tells them, go home, or when anybody tells them, go home, the question for them is, home where, right? Because this is the only place that I know. So the best thing that we can do as a country, because the refugee problem is not going away anytime soon. We have to be honest about that, right? Because the conflicts in the region are not stopping anytime soon. We would like very much for them to stop, but we have no control over that. The Somali problem has been going on for 30 years. The Ethiopian conflict is still going on. In fact, they even sparked a new one just the other day, with the Tigray conflict. So we are set to be receiving more refugees as time goes on. And instead of keeping them in squalid conditions in the refugee camps, why not give them an opportunity to better the country that they're now calling home?
Okay.
Instead of now them living in a condition where they have no hope. It's better that they get a job and start contributing to the taxes. Because after all, if they get a job, it helps us. Yeah.
Plus the fear that they have of probably being repatriated home to a home where they do not know where to begin from. What are some of these other challenges that the refugees are facing? I was almost asking you, how then do we solve this problem of the refugee? But, from what Paul says, we might as well stop, thinking about that and focus on dealing with the problem as it is as of now.
Okay, now if I may add to his points, it's that as partners on ground, we also try to work with the hosting communities, the surrounding communities. We also try to minimize the fears that they may have regarding them being integrated. And therefore, it's a journey. Remember, like at first they feel that, okay, we have limited resources, for example, limited water resources, vegetation and so forth, and they're coming. So with time you have to engage, together and say, okay, they are coming, they are fleeing a situation that's really makes them vulnerable, makes them, they really need assistance, and they are here to support us. So we try to also balance the concerns that the communities have and also the needs that the refugees and the asylum seekers have. So I think that's one of the additional challenges we are facing in relation to the limited resources that we have. For example, in the north, you can see we have drought going on. We have water resources are getting scarce, the vegetation is scarce, so there's competition for resources. How do you balance that out? So those are the challenges that we are facing. And also, generally you can see as we have a tough economic time right now. We have a fuel crisis that's very high, and the further up you go in the country, the more expensive this is. So that's another issue that they are also facing harsh economic times. And I think one of the solutions, as my colleagues say, let's integrate them as part of our economy so that we see how they can contribute towards, making more resources available. So I think they are part and parcel. They are Kenyans. They are feeling the Kenyan pain that we are having right now. And so some of the issues that you see Kenyans complaining, like harsh economic times, limited resources, they are also facing them where they are. Yeah.
All right. What brings in the difference, Okello? And I'd want to assume that as a community leader, you probably are dealing with, very many refugees, from different angles and quarters. So what brings in the difference on the kinds of refugees that we have, if at all there is a difference?
Okay, basically because we have some refugees from Ethiopia, and almost we have different refugees who are across from Africa, And then the difference is always remains the kind of problems that each and everyone's face at home.
Okay.
Because when we talk of the problems, you know, my problems with another person, another refugee problem is always different. Like if my problems, if I left home when the gun was shot behind me, and then the other person might have left the home because of some economic challenges. Those small problems are existing, but they are basically the differences that we have. But what I saw in most refugees in Kenya, most of them left the country because of insecurity, because of war, not because of drought, but many of them. The many refugees I met in Kenya, most of them left because they could not live at home. They could not be able to stay at home. And those are basically the differences that we have as refugees. And then you find the economic status of myself and the other refugees are a little bit different. There are those who are living in the camp, they are making business better, they go on with their lives better. And then you find another refugees who is very vulnerable and they do not even have something to eat. And those are the small differences. But what is so much important always is the intervention of the partners like DRC, what my sister was talking about. If they identify you as very vulnerable, like you do not even have something to eat, they come in and then they assist you. So there are those differences that we have as refugees. Yeah.
Okay. All right. As we come to a close, Paul, we speak of integration, very important. And while we get to embrace this, it should not be at the expense of the going down of a certain nation. We all want to see all our African nations stand tall. We want to see Somalia back, to equilibrium. We want to see sobriety in South Sudan and sobriety in Sudan. And as well, we understand the contribution of its citizens to this. So while we speak about integration, how do we make sure that we again do not do this at the expense of the stability or the expense of regaining stability of these other nations?
Oh yes, the crafters of the OAU document, because before the African Union there was the Organization of African Unity, which is the OAU, they crafted a document in 1969 that particularly envisioned this scenario, because they understood at that time there was the clamor for independence for many of the African states. And so they understood that these states were then undergoing a period of military struggle. So they envisioned a scenario where people would be fleeing en masse to the borders of other countries.
Yeah.
So this instrument, we can still use it today because it captures very well some of the reasons, majority of the reasons, in fact, why we have so many refugees from our neighboring countries, because many of them are war-torn. Now, despite the fact that we don't want to contribute to the economic downturn of these countries, we cannot, at this point, we cannot in good conscience say that we can stabilize Somalia. We can't. We can't say that we can stabilize, for instance, DRC. We can't. These are things that are way outside of our control. We can do what we can to assist their governments, but in the meantime, the people caught in the middle are the refugees. Because we would like very much, for instance, Somalia to become stable again and to then take back their citizens and host them again and repatriate them completely. But in the meantime, what do we do to the people that are stuck in the middle? That is a question, that is the reason why we're here. And the best solution for those people is for us as Kenyan people to understand that we have the gift of peace, which our neighbors do not. Right? Kenya has enjoyed by far the longest running peaceful government in the region for a long time, because all of our neighbors at some point have had a military struggle, I think with the exception of Tanzania, but the rest of us have, the rest of the states have had serious problems. So the best way for Kenya to show its leadership in the region, because Kenya is a leader in the region, the best way we can show leadership in the region is to allow the citizens of our fellow countries who are struggling to come to this country, and those who are here and really have no option, let's integrate them.
Well put. Thank you so much. And I think there's no better way of closing it. We close it at that very point, and we embrace integration. Integration, I think, probably the way to go. It was nice having you.
Thank you.
Kimanzi, the